I call it B2H most of the time, so business to human. If there are human being using the product, then they need to get their emotion honored and they need to be delighted as well. Deep delight is when a feature is solving for both.
In my mind, you can win in a B2B space because you are delightful, because everyone else isn't it.
When you're building a feature, show it to the user. Take your prototype and show it to the users and see their reaction. Are they surprised? Are they happy? Are they making a small smile or not at all?
Oh my God, Dios mío, this is, oh my God, Dios mío.
Welcome to Hotfix. Our guest today is Nesrine Changuel. Nesrine has plenty of experience in product management. She worked at companies like Google, Spotify, and Microsoft as a senior PM. At Google, she worked at Google Meet and Chrome. She also worked at Google Meet when COVID broke out. Nesrine is now organizing product meetups and events in Paris. And she will be releasing her first book by the end of March 2024. In her book, Nesrine talks about why creating product delight is so important for building successful products. In our conversation today, we will cover how to create product delight. We'll talk about one failure story from her time at Google when she was working on Google Meet. And we had a conversation about why not all product work should be quantifiable. Welcome to the show, Nesrine.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Nesrine. I'm very excited to have you. And I would like to start with talking a little bit about the book you are currently releasing. And you are talking about the importance of emotions when building products. And can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that? Why do you think this is so important?
Absolutely. So during most of my careers, like for the last 12 years, I've been working in quite mature companies. And during those years, I never thought that it's such an important topic because I was like super embedded into these ways of working. But now that I left Google and left like my corporate experience and I'm coaching organizations, I'm realizing that there is a very high need to educate around the emotional connections. So let me explain a little bit around that. So I usually talk about emotional connections as the need to honor not only functional motivators of the users, but also honor the emotional motivators of our users. And like most companies are very, very good and they do quite well in terms of creating functionalities and features and productive features. However, it requires quite patience and a little bit of discipline to understand what motivates users at the emotional level to use our product. And since it's a little bit harder and require a little bit more of work, they end up not doing it. The problem is that if you don't do this exercise, your product will end up as the others, I would say, and will not be able to stand out in a such crowded market. So the book is about educating organizations and product leaders toward this new mindset, which is not only create functional product, but also emotionally engaging product to win this crowded market.
That is very interesting. And I believe what I find most interesting about this is if I, for example, look at marketers, right? Marketers have figured this out years ago. And it seems in product, we are thinking, we can just functionally solve the problem. It doesn't matter if we connect with the user, right? But in the end, we always talk about solving users' problems. And there's obviously an emotional part to problems. Why do you believe that product managers are not prone to thinking about this emotional side while marketers have already figured this out?
Yeah, this is a very good point. So marketers, I think they did that for years now. And the best advertisements are those that are based on emotional marketing. And by the way, even designers, they are equipped by tools and even trainings toward how to create emotional design. And there are a couple of very interesting books, by the way, toward how to design with emotions. But when I started writing the book, I realized that there is no single book around building products with emotional perspective with it. So that's how I started. But now your question is why it's not even the case is because we are trained for years that we should solve problems. And I was very happy, for example, when I start to see product guru, like for example, Teresa Torres, don't talk about problem space and solution space. She talks about opportunity space. and solution space. And that's already a great shift and a great start of changing mindset from solving problem to honoring opportunities. And not all products are solving problem. And I would love to give you an example. I worked at Spotify for about 4 years. And I've been building a lot of features. Some of them are indeed very functional, like, for example, the volume normalization features that are extremely functional, but a lot of them are absolutely not functional. The best feature I could highlight here is Spotify Wrapped. So this Wrapped feature that you get your summary at the end of the year has nothing to do with functionality or productivity, or it's not a functional feature. But guess what? Wrapped by itself, just Wrapped. I don't know how much you know about the stats, but Wrapped by itself in 2020 contributed in 20% increase of the app download. So Wrapped is so emotional. It's all about allowing yourself to feel how cool you are or how much you belong to a community. So valuing both the functionality and the emotional perspective is your way to create product that way.
That's super interesting. Actually, Stefan and I did an episode a couple of weeks ago about features that don't solve problems. And we also talked about Spotify Wrapped. One other area that we talked about where I think a lot of companies are trying to create emotional attachment is with new AI features. We also looked at Miro and also at Apple Intelligence. I think these are two examples where these companies really try to invest into making delightful user experiences that create an emotional connection. However, do you think that also smaller, I mean, these are huge companies. These are companies that have already found product market fit, that have already found the problem that they want to solve. But what would you recommend maybe an earlier SaaS company? When should they start investing into creating also emotional attachment?
Yes, that's an excellent question, because I think, of course, I'm convinced that functionality has to exist and it has to be good enough. So you cannot start thinking about emotional connection while your product is already not honoring the functional need. The emotional connection should not come too late, because otherwise the users will already attach emotionally with other competitors. So you need to start injecting the emotional connection quite early in the process, as soon as you start to feel that the functionality is already there. It contributes in so many improvements to your product. The first is to get a brand. For example, think about Slack. They immediately started to be delightful with colors, with emojis, with GIF. So from the start, they differentiated themselves as a delightful product. And that's how they also win the product market fit, and they got the growth they were hoping for. So I would say start to create some delight into your product early on. Otherwise, the users will have a perception that the product is all about productivity. It's gray, it's not engaging, and they will quickly and very, very easily jump into a competitor product.
And I think you now mentioned Slack, and this is maybe the most important question for me here, because I think for a very long time in my career, I had product leaders telling me, and I worked in B2B SaaS my entire career, had product leaders telling me, we are a B2B SaaS company, it needs to work, it doesn't need to be fancy. And I think this is an exact sentence a former boss said to me. And I was never sure if this is true, right? Because I think obviously there are still humans on the other side. And in my mind, you can win in a B2B space because you are delightful, because everyone else isn't it, or so many are not focused on it. Because I think in B2B, it's not as much as a necessity, right? In B2C, I think you lose if you're not delightful, right? If you think about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I think there was, 15 different apps to learn a second language. Now there's just Duolingo, in my mind at least. And I think it's probably one of the most delightful apps that I know. And there's this little bird cheering you up all the time. It's perfect, right? And they won. And I think they are probably not much better than all the others. And I think in B2B, the opportunity is just so much bigger to actually win because of it, in my mind, because building something that people like to use means they will not try to pitch to their boss every other reason to churn, but rather stay with it because they're actually happy when they use the product.
I love your reflection. I fully agree with what you said, because when we talk about emotion, we're talking about human reaction. And whether you're using a B2B product or B2C product, since at the end of the chain, they are a human being using the product, they deserve their emotion to be honored. So I call it B2H most of the time, so business to human. If they are a human being using the product, then they need to get their emotion honored, and they need to be delighted as well. So I usually try to be vocal about this is not a B2C domain. So emotional connection and product delight is not only exclusive for B2C. Yes, we can see it more often nowadays in the B2C, but they can easily apply in the B2B. And even the impact is higher in the B2B world. Let me give you an example. The other day, for the book, by the way, writing process, I was interviewing head of product at Atlassian. And this guy is leading the entire Jira process. And Jira is an entire B2B product. And I realized that over the last 12 months, they have been heavily investing into how to create emotional connection between Jira, which is the B2B product, and users. Who thought that there are minds in the company thinking about creating emotional connection for Jira? But when I reflected on that, let me share with you a personal story. So I've been working at Spotify for about 4 years, and then I moved to Google. And when I was working for Spotify, we used Jira. So that's our way of tracking progress, etc. And I never thought that I was emotionally connected or I even loved that product. I mean, it's a productive product. But guess what? When I moved to Google and we had no Jira and no system to prioritize or whatever, like at Google, we usually use spreadsheets and document and Google Docs. I missed it so much. It's like, that's where I realized that I miss so much Jira. Like, sorry for the audience who hate Jira. You will see and you will feel it when you start not having system like that. And that was for me a sign that there was something extra to just the functionality that I was getting out of Jira. There was something extra which allowed me to be a better PM, allowed me to have more credibility and get myself done in a better way. So Slack is another example. So we see people differentiating themselves, whether it's B2B or B2C, through emotional connection.
For me, it was actually the other way around. We moved from GitHub to Jira, and then I immediately felt the emotional connection because it was so much better. So for everyone's listening, Nesrine is releasing her book, hopefully in March, where she dives deeper into the topic of emotional connection. So for everyone's interested, you can read more then. Okay, let's get to the heart of the podcast, which is our failure story. You brought us something when you were working on Google Meet, where you had some challenges. Would you like to guide us through this failure story?
Yeah, so it's funny because maybe I would not call it a failure story, but let's go through it and then you tell me how you feel about it. So I've been working on Google Meet for a couple of years, and guess what? I started on Google Meet exactly when COVID hit. Absolutely not the best time to start working as a product manager, but it was funny because during that time, what happened is that the usage of Google Meet just went skyrocket. Like we moved from having meetings in rooms to all meetings happening on Google Meet. My mission at the time was to make sure that working remote using Google Meet is engaging, satisfying, and delightful. So that was a big mission. We built features like background replays to allow people to protect their privacies, etc. And we have been thinking toward how can we make meetings less boring. Like boredom was highlighted as one demotivators, or things that people highlighted as their emotional demotivators. But here's one of the things that happened during that time is that just from overnight, we started receiving a lot of feedbacks, and people are complaining about one particular situation is that, hey, Google Meet enabled gesture reaction, and when I put thumb up, I'm having fireworks, and that sometimes is not appropriate. The interesting part is that it was not a Google Meet Google Meet feature. It was something that was enabled by Apple out of one of the recent operating system updates. And what happens is that since that feature was enabled by default, people had that fireworks or those reactions, whether they are in like official meetings or calling their therapy, and they immediately thought it's a feature by Google Meet. So we had to react to this kind of course, feedback by explaining that they need to disable the feature directly from their Mac. But that was a good sign for us also to reflect on what make our users delighted and what does not make our users delighted. So at Google, we spend so much time thinking about inclusiveness. So every feature need to be inclusive. And the way how we think about is every time you have a new idea or a new feature, think about, does it bring any harm to any type of user? So is there any users, independently where they are, that could be annoyed or harmed by this feature? So for example, in this case of reaction, even if the intention was extremely positive and it was all about bringing delight, for particular situation, I remember there was even a bad press. There was a guy who reported to the press saying that I was in therapy showing my hurt finger, and during my therapy session, I had firework. What an appropriate time. So these are reminders for every product leader or product manager that it's not only about the functionality, it's about how it's perceived by users and even by all users and all cases.
And if you think back, so when I listen to you, in my mind, talking about this emotional connection before, right? Is it that users simply assumed this must be a Google feature because there were just other things in Google Meet that altered your screen, right? A background, or I don't know, a funny mask or whatever, right? I remember this video from, I don't know, 2 years ago where this judge had like this animal mask and he couldn't remove it. And like, there's these like kinds of situations where I, until we talked, thought that these reactions are a Google Meet feature. And I would have never associated them with anything other than Google Meet.
Yeah. Actually, Zoom users had exactly the same problem. Google, like Microsoft Teams, has exactly the same problem. As long as you're using a Mac, you experience it because it's enabled by default. Of course, we at Google thought about enabling our own gesture reactions, but we did it in a complete different way. Like you can have a warning, because sometimes I'm talking to you and I'm like that, and I don't know if that will trigger anything. So you get the warning you're about to trigger a reaction. That's a much better user-friendly experience than immediately by default triggering whatever effect, and it turns out to be a bad surprise. By the way, we spoke about delight, and I want to share the definition of delight, because sometimes people get confused and they think about it more as a buzzword than the science. And I was surprised when I started to dig deep into this concept of delight. I realized that there is a theoretical definition behind delight. And guess what? Delight is a combination of two emotions. So if you are in a time where you're experiencing joy and surprise, then you're delighted. So delight equal joy plus surprise. Just think about it for a moment. If you're experiencing those two, then you're delighted. And what happened with this example of the inappropriate reactions is that, yes, you have the surprise, but the joy is not there. Then it's actually more a disappointment than a delight. So it's very important to see whether the two components are there every time. And
do you believe that taking this risk on delighting, because I think in the end, the intention was delighting users, right? Because it's surprising and hopefully joyful when this reaction happens.
Yes.
So I think when attaching a product to emotions, the more you try to build for emotions, the more risk you create to generate negative emotions, right? What's the balance? So like when you now talk about it, I am thinking maybe Apple did the right thing. Maybe there's just very rare exceptions. Is it fine to take these risks? But we are now not talking about some small business risk of a number being worse at a time, but actually hurting someone's emotions, maybe significantly. So when building for emotions, the risk is just different. So what risk appetite should PMs have there?
Absolutely. So we did not spoke about the impact of building for emotion from a product and business perspective, for example. Let's cover that and then get back to the risk part. While doing my research, I discovered that very recently, just over the last 2 years, there have been at least 5 studies by giant firm like Capgemini or McKinsey or Deloitte or Business Harvard Review, like very, very well-known firm who studied what? Guess what? They studied the impact of emotional connection on users' adoption and business success. Like exactly what we were talking about. For me, that was a good sign that this topic is getting more and more attention, and it's getting into those very serious studies and into these very serious companies. And out of those research, I will summarize them into 2 words. Like, I went through the 5 studies and I came out to conclusion that out of those studies, they found that they compared actually 2 group of users, and they took like 30,000 users across different industries like tourism, tech, etc. And they found out that if you compare users who are emotionally connected with users who are satisfied. So satisfied is that they ask for a functionality, they get it. Emotionally connected, they get the functionality, and at the same time, they get more. There is a higher expectation there. And they found that the group that is emotionally connected is twice more likely to buy the product, to refer the product, and to stay loyal. Like, the retention, the revenue, and the referral was doubled compared to the satisfied users. I'm not even talking about users who are not satisfied. Like, these are out of the studies. So could you see the huge opportunity? Like, you're already doubling your revenue, your referral, and your retention. So that's a big improvement. Now, if it's so rewarding, it always comes with risks, as you said. So that's why I wanted to jump to risk later. The first work you have to do is, of course, to invest in identifying users' motivators, like the emotional motivators. Let me give you an example. Like at Spotify, the functional motivators is just to listen to music or to listen to podcasts. Easy. And it's universal. Like they all have exactly the same functional motivators. However, the emotional motivators is extremely different. I mean, I would love to hear your emotional motivators to listen to Spotify. For me, sometimes it's to feel less lonely. I mean, I'm lonely today and I want to listen to some music to get some relief, or to get more productive, because I feel like I'm more productive when I'm listening to music, or to feel connected, because the fact that I'm part of this big product, I feel like I'm part of something. So the emotional motivators could be very different, and sometimes even unconscious. Sometimes people don't even know what's their emotional motivators for using a product. So as I said, it requires you paying attention to understand what are the emotional motivators of your users. Once you've done that, then you need to do it in a proper way, because in the book, I'm even listing something that I'm calling the Delight Excellence list. So the Delight Excellence is a list of 9 items that every product manager has to go through one by one to validate that their delightful features or their emotionally engaging features is done right. One of them is what we spoke about, inclusiveness. Make sure you're not hurting anyone. And that happens very easily if you don't do your segmentation right, or you don't think about your users universally. By the way, I would love to share a story. I mean, since we're talking about failures sometime, I've seen a feature last year by Deliveroo. We all know this company, and the intention was so brilliant. It was like Mother's Day, and they sent a notification to like mobile, and the notification looks like a missed call from your mom. And then if you click on it, you get like, it's Mother's Day, think about sending flowers to your mom. So the feature is like sending flower to relatives. And this feature had so much bad press, even if the intention was positive, because it's harmful for some categories of users. Not everyone have the luxury of having this phone call or this missed call or the possibility to send these flowers. And for me, like, that particular feature was so uninclusive, like extremely. So inclusiveness is extremely important. The measurability is important. You need to measure the success, whether this make impact or not. But there are 2 more things I want to highlight. One is distraction. The feature, whether it's emotionally engaging, delightful or not, should not distract the users. Think about Clippy. I don't know if you're the generation of Clippy or not, but I'm part of that generation of Microsoft Clippy, that small clip that, honestly, if you Google Microsoft Clippy, it's quite iconic. And it remained on Microsoft Office for 10 years, decided to kill it because the intention was delightful, like to bring some small delightful tips, but it was so destructive that just people hate it. Like Microsoft received plenty of complaint, please kill Clippy. I mean, all about distraction. And the last piece, I would say, it's not because it's emotionally engaging that it should not bring impact to the users. So think about your vision, and independently, whether it's functional or emotional, the feature should bring you closer to your vision and the impact you want to make on your users. For example, you mentioned Duolingo. I love using Duolingo. I think it's one of the most delightful product, but at the same time, they have one particular feature, the Duolingo streaks. And I was listening to Lenny's podcast a couple of months ago. He brought this head of growth from Duolingo, and he said something incredible. Like he said, streaks by itself, just that feature, double the value of the company. It's like, wow. I was like, really? It's so amazing. If it's true, it's so amazing, because such an emotionally engaging feature could make such important impact to the product.
I have one question there, because I think you mentioned that it's so important that the company then segments right, understands their user right. And I think now, going back to this initial question on delightfulness in B2B SaaS, I've now seen many B2B SaaS companies, and I would argue that most don't even know what their ICP is. They are so far away from very granularly segmenting their users, or even remotely understanding who are the people that are using their products. They're mostly thinking about companies and company types, and they are not going deep enough for users. So are they even able then to build delightful products if they don't have that information?
They need to look for those information. I mean, that's the point. And these are achievable. So let me give you some stats that really surprised me. Out of those studies that I have been looking for, I realized that both for B2B and B2C, there are two numbers that are extremely interesting to look at. The first number is that 80% of organizations think that they know the emotional motivators of their clients, whether it's B2B or B2C. 80% of organizations think that they know. Now, the second number is even more interesting. 15% of the clients believe that the organizations know their emotional motivators. So there's a huge gap between what the leaders think they know and what the customers know. And when the customers start to become emotionally connected, that second percentage gets higher, because then they start to feel like, okay, the company start to understand me. They are serving me with exactly what I'm needing today. So you asked me about how can I collect those motivators? And luckily there are techniques and there are methods that you can apply. One of them is called motivational interviewing. So, if you're already doing some product discovery, you are interviewing your users, you're doing a bit of UXRs, and UXRs nowadays are not always done the right way. I mean, I've seen people asking users what they want, what do they want to achieve, or what's your pain point, what's your challenge. People don't know what's their challenge sometimes. I mean, it's up to you, and that's why you're hired as a product manager, to figure out that pain point. For me, it's very hard to give you what's my pain point. However, if I start talking about how was my experience over the last time I used the product, what were my struggles, and get deep into conversation of my journey, then you probably will start to see and surface some challenges. So motivational interviewing is a method, very structured methods that start with open-ended questions. Never ask what's your problem or whatever. It's more about tell me about the journey, last journey you used the product, for example. The second piece of the framework is reflection. Then there's observation, reflection, and summary. So open-ended, start with asking the question, then you make observations, and then you reflect, and then you summarize. So I recommend people to look at these methods because I'm referring to it as well in the book. And it's a new way of interviewing users by giving attention to their emotion rather than their functional needs.
Christoph, I think we can move on to the provocative thought corner, right? Thank you very much, first of all. I already have the feeling that I learned quite a lot. And now we want to end it with a bit of controversy, hopefully. So in a past conversation, you mentioned that not all products should be quantifiable. So because I think especially investing in delight, you say it's a necessity. And even though it's not measurable all the time. And I want to preface this question with, I am very much a numbers product manager. I think so. I love looking at impact. I love looking at what can it do, how can it help the company move forward, how can it impact ARR, and so on and so forth. So for me, this is especially hard to swallow that you say not everything has to be quantifiable. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, so particularly with emotion, I think we live in a world where product managers are asked to prove the success of their feature very quickly. Like you're building the feature this month and you need to already show the impact on retention or revenue engagement the next month. And that works, by the way, on functional features. However, on emotional features, you need to be patient. It needs some time. So I'm not saying that does not impact metrics, but it impact metrics over a much longer time frame. And we spoke about Wrapped, for example, and how much impact the app download, 20% is huge. We spoke about Duolingo and how much this impact the company value. But that was not over the next quarter. It took months to start realizing that this is actually impacting amazingly over my metrics. So this is what I usually try to elaborate. Delight will absolutely impact your business metrics. It will just take some time and you need to be patient, and you need also to measure the right things. So if you keep measuring exactly the same way how you measure your metric or your functional features, then you may not see the value that you are hoping for. I just want to end with that quote. I don't know, by the way, we even said it, but it resonates so well. It's not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted count. And that applies perfectly in the case of emotionally engagement. If you're dealing with emotion, it counts, but it's not very easy to be counted.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So a product manager gets a goal. I don't know, increase retention by X% until the end of the year. For example, let's say we have a long time horizon that would incentivize us to also do something on emotion. Let's say now, I don't know, a PM in my team, I give her the task to increase retention by 10% until end of this year and have her go from there. How would she then decide for an emotional feature over some functional feature? Because I think also the fear is it's more unsure, right? It's also harder for me to account before I decide to do this. Will this work or will it not? Will it just mean to take more risk? Is that how it works?
The best way to do is to do neither of those. So when I talk about delight, there are two types of delight. There is the surface delight, which is only dealing with emotional needs and emotional motivators. And there is the deep delight, which is even harder, but it's much more rewarding. Deep delight is when a feature is solving for both. It's already solving for functional needs and at the same time allows you to feel better. So this is the second category, and that's the type of delight that I'm usually very vocal, and I'm talking a lot about this type in my book. And I even developed the framework that I'm calling the Delight Grid framework. It's a visualization table that allow product manager to come and place their features and see how many of them are functional only, surface delight only, or deep delight only. If you have very, very little, very few of deep delight, I'm bringing tips and suggestion how to move them from functional only to deep delight. And if you get to that spot, you will get your revenue or your retention metric for sure.
How would you then, so I think this can, and I love it, by the way, and I think this can work really well. But what if you have one of those bosses like me in the past that tells you it just needs to work, it doesn't need to be delightful? We are building for finance departments in whatever industry. They need something that works, they need something that optimizes their work. How do you deal with that? How do you get out of that?
That's so common, by the way. You're not coming up with something completely unfamiliar. So we all driven by deadlines, and we're driven by selling independently of the reaction of the users. But the way how I usually evoke this topic is by saying you don't have to start big, start small. So for example, in my book, I'm talking about prioritization order, where I'm saying you have to have 50% of functional only features, 40% of deep delight, and 10% of surface delight, because sometimes we love some sparkles as well and some nice features as well. So I'm not saying that you need to change completely the order of your priority, but start small, and maybe every quarter think about what could be the smallest feature that I could bring to my roadmap without engaging too much effort. So if you start by changing your way of prioritizing completely, then of course you would get resistance and your boss would come to you and this is not functional and we don't like it. Otherwise, if you start to inject from time to time small delightful features, you see that it's already bringing the impact from a metric perspective, then it's much easier to convince the next quarter, etc., etc. So start small is the best tips for that.
Yeah, I think it also ties back very nicely to what you previously said, that not all features should or have to solve problems. And I think one of the most important part is that it's just very transparent, that we're now investing into delight, that we're now, what we're trying to create, the value that we're trying to create with this work is to create delight. Because otherwise, what I can see that happens is that the leaders or bosses are using that as an excuse. So that they're saying, we need this feature because I think it's a cool idea. And then there's no metric tied to it. There's no customer problem tied to it. And then but the excuse is that we're trying to build delight here. And I think,
yeah, I agree with that. But maybe there's one more thing that you could do is when you're building a feature, show it to the user. So let's say you're doing a concept validation and you take your prototype and show it to the users and see their reaction. Are they surprised? Are they happy? Are they making a small smile or not at all? By the way, that's exactly what I'm doing with my book cover today. So I'm hesitating toward which design should I select. And the way how I do it is that I book some calls with some of my network. I don't want to do that offline, by the way, because I don't see their reaction. I don't see the face. And I show them the book cover and they say, how would you feel? What kind of emotion does that brings to you? And that should be the case for almost every feature, because the fact that you see the user's reaction and their emotional bond on that could give you good insights.
And also, I think it needs to have at least some small space in the company strategy. I think that Duolingo, Miro, all these companies who are great at delighting customers, they have it somewhere written in their company values that we want to delight customers.
Absolutely. This is a great point, by the way, because as a product manager at Google Meet, we, of course, craft product strategy every year. And I had something called product pillars. These are like the guiding policies. And one of my pillars or product pillars was called delight. And it's a reminder for the entire product team that every feature that you have to build has to bring a bit of smile or a bit of joy to the user's story or the user's journey. I was interviewing for the book a couple of product leaders from different organizations to see how they are dealing with delight on their side, because I'm much more influenced by the company I've been working for. And for example, for Dropbox, I've been interviewing someone from Dropbox, and he told me that at Dropbox, they had something called Cupcake. They had a product pillar called Cupcake. And I can see Stefan and Christoph already smile. Immediately, as I said Cupcake, they smiled. So they didn't call delight, but that reminds the delight. So they took the word Cupcake as a way to remind that it has to be delightful. Yes, I 100% agree. If it's not part of the organization structure, it's not part of their strategy, then it's very easy to fall into forgotten.
Great. Amazing. Nesrine, I think with that we can wrap it up. I think it has been a very, very insightful episode. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and wisdom. To our listeners, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We will be back soon. Thanks for joining us today. Bye.